Great, thanks for asking me to come along, Patrick. So I've been involved in the evaluation of Marie-Curie Individual Fellowships since 2011 on and off, initially as an expert evaluator and then as a vice chair of the evaluation process. So I'm going to talk a little bit, and there is some overlap with what Grace has said already. I'm also going to reiterate some of the points that Patrick raised as well, but just generally what happens after you hit the submit button with your application, and then sort of come back again to bearing that in mind. What might you take into account when you're preparing your application? I don't know. Right, so to talk first of all about the phases in the evaluation, the first thing that happens is that there is an eligibility check carried out by the RIA staff, the Research Executive Agency staff. So before it even goes for evaluation, it will be checked to see if it's actually eligible in terms of the mobility, in terms of your research experience and so on. Then is the allocation, where the proposal is allocated, and it will be allocated to at least 3 evaluators. Generally speaking, actually exclusively, it's evaluated on the basis of the keywords, and only if the keywords is not enough to be able to find 3 experts, the evaluators will go into the body of the proposal itself, or those allocating the proposals will go into the body of it itself. So I would say one thing to bear in mind is that if you want to make sure that you get the best qualified evaluators for your proposal, be extremely judicious in your selection of keywords. It is very important because it's something that people tend to leave to the very last minute. It's something they do on the last day, right before submission, is allocate keywords to their proposals. Bear in mind that that is the basis on which your proposal is going to be allocated to the evaluators, and make sure that the keywords are well chosen to allocate it to experts that will really be able to give good feedback on the proposal. Also, that your abstract actually accurately describes what your project is about and what it aims to do, because the abstract will also be used to allocate your proposal to evaluators. Then comes the individual phase in the process, where those 3 evaluators working independently, they're not supposed to take into account their own university affiliation. They wouldn't get applications generally from their own university to evaluate anyway, but they're also not supposed to represent their country as well as their university. So they're working as individuals, offering an objective evaluation of the proposal as it currently stands. So they're not allowed to take into account what it might have looked like if you had made other changes. They evaluate as it stands. And they have no access to each other while they're doing this. No expert is aware of any of the other experts working during the individual phase. So they work individually, they submit comments, and on the basis of those comments, they submit scores. So they look at what the strengths are of the proposal, what the weaknesses are of the proposal, and they allocate a score to each criterion initially, and then an overall score to the proposal. And it's only after they have submitted their individual reports that they would then move on to the consensus phase. And the consensus phase also happens online. There's a consensus discussion amongst the 3 experts where they decide what their overall view of the proposal is. And this is a genuine discussion where they discuss the merits, the strengths and weaknesses of the proposal. It may be that one person explains to the other 2 why they scored a proposal particularly high or particularly low in a particular sub-criterion. And the 3 evaluators come to an agreement on the comments first for the on the proposal, on its strengths and weaknesses, and then on the scores in each criterion. And the rapporteur, so one of those 3 experts, prepares a consensus report, a CR, on the basis of their discussion, and using comments from the individual reports as well. So they agree on the consensus report, and at that point, once they've agreed, it's sent on to a team of vice chairs who prepare the final evaluation summary report. Basically, the vice chairs are not involved in evaluating the proposal at all, so they're not involved in setting comments or setting scores. They check to see if the comments are in line with the scores, if the score is explained through the comments, and they will go back to the experts if they have any questions. So the evaluation summary report, which is the report that you will get sent out at the end of the evaluation process, which gives you feedback on your proposal it comes from the consensus report after it has been checked over by a quality check by a team of vice chairs. Okay, so that's what happens once you have submitted your proposal. I want to come back to this table that Grace put up because it is extremely important that you take into account all of these criteria and sub-criteria. There are 10 different categories there, so 10 different sub-criteria that are taken into account in evaluating your proposal. And as Grace mentioned, everyone puts their energy into this one box, which is 1 of 10. You can have the best idea in the world, the one that's going to change the world, but if you can't show that you are in a position to follow through on this project, that you have a clear plan for how you're going to get from A to B, and if you can't show that you're going to be able to publicise the results of that project amongst experts to really change the field, and also amongst the general public to show how this is going to have an impact, a broader impact beyond your project, if you can't have a good impact section and a good implementation section, you're not going to get funded. So every single one of these boxes, you need to give it equal attention. Even if there is actually a scoring weighting amongst the criteria and amongst the sub-criteria, I would still recommend that you give appropriate time to each of those 10 sub-criteria to ensure you're really hitting it across the board. So you're really making sure that you have the best possible plan for how to carry out the amazing, outstanding, innovative research that you want to carry out. Okay, so just to mention as well, in that when you're thinking in terms of those sub-criteria, do think of the criteria that they belong within. So, for example, enhancing the future careers prospects of the researcher after the fellowship. What you're looking there, that's an impact. It's not about what you have done so far. It's what is the impact of this fellowship going to be on your career and on your employability after the fellowship. Quality of the proposed measures to exploit and disseminate the project results is an impact on the field. What is the impact going to be on the community of experts that are going to read your work? And the quality of proposed measures to communicate the project activities to different target audiences is broader impact on the general public. Likewise, in implementation, these are categories that are involved. So the work plan, how are you going to implement the project that you have in mind? How is this going to be laid out? The appropriateness of management structures, what are the structures that are there in place that are going to be available to you to ensure the optimal implementation of the project? And the appropriate of the institutional environment, you need to be able to show that this is the best place to carry out the research that you propose. Okay, so I mentioned that comments come first and then scores. And that is very much the case. Scoring is from 0 to 5, and evaluators are encouraged to use the full range of the scoring. So, in other words, it's not going to be 0, 1, 2, it'll be 1.4, or it could be 4.7, or it could be 3.2. So you'll get a decimal score which relates to the comments, so that the evaluators first decide on comments and then attribute scores to those comments, their consensus comments that they've come up with during the consensus discussion. And on the basis of the scoring of your proposal, and bearing in mind the weighting of the individual criteria, excellence is weighted more than impact and implementation, an overall score will be produced through this, and a ranking list is created through that scoring process. And then they start with the funding that they have available and fund from the top down until they get to the cut-off point. Okay, so a couple of things I suppose to point out there is just, for example, it is possible to get a score of excellent with 1 or even 2 minor shortcomings. So the evaluators might highlight something that is something they find slightly problematic. They highlight it for your attention, but might say this is still outstanding, this is still excellent, and still award you 5. At the same time, there might be no identified weaknesses. They can't say this is specifically a weakness, but they're still not overwhelmingly persuaded by what you've said. They might score at 4.8 without any noted weaknesses, but they might make clear through the comments that something is very good, but not necessarily excellent. Okay, so do bear in mind that the descriptors of those scores as well will also dictate, or will also play a part in how you should read your evaluation summary report. So the next part is going to overlap to some extent with what Grace has said already. I'm just going to give some general tips on how to approach the different sections based on my experience of the evaluation process. So in terms of research, make sure that your description of your project is clear, and bear in mind that you're writing for someone who might not know as much about your particular subject area as you do. So be very, very clear in explaining the project. If you be very, very clear in explaining the methodologies involved. This is something that I'm coming from the humanities. We struggle a lot with explaining methodologies, and it is very important to explain the approaches that you will take. There needs to be a clear explanation of current research in the field. The concept of state of the art is a very scientific concept. What is the most up-to-date research in the field, and how will your project build on that research? Because you can't say I'm doing something completely different, because then you're not using the knowledge that's already out there. How is it going to build on it, and how is it going to push the state of the art? How is it going to do something new? Think about its relevance. Why is it important that this project is funded? You're asking for a huge investment of European taxpayers' money. So why? Why do they need to fund this project? And timeliness, why does it need to be funded now? Those categories, relevance and timeliness, were in earlier iterations of the Marie-Curie evaluation criteria, and they're still in there implicitly. So I would say keep those in mind. What is the relevance of the project? Why should it be funded, and why should it be funded now? Training, I really want to emphasize this, because people see the fellowship as a research fellowship. This is not a research fellowship, this is a training fellowship. The training should be integral to the way in which you present your proposal. You want to show how this investment in you and your research will bring you to be one of the best researchers in Europe, that it's going to really put you at the top of the field, and that this is going to enable you to share the knowledge with the rest of Europe as well. So be honest with yourself. Where are the gaps in your CV and in your profile? Where do you need additional training? What do you need to develop? And think about how you're going to use the fellowship to fill those gaps, to make yourself more employable. What is missing, and what can you do to fill those gaps? What kind of expert training do you need? And that should be allied to a clear training plan. Now, you don't have to include the training plan in your proposal, but I think it's useful to have one in mind and to use that to focus the training. You also need to say that you will work one out with your supervisor, that there will be a training plan created between you, and that it will be reviewed, and as new training needs arise, that they will be dealt with appropriately as they come along. So think about a training plan. And all of the training should be aligned to the project goals and the researcher's training needs. So in order to be able to carry out this aspect of the project, you need to have expert training in, and you're going to get it here by this month in order to be able to move on to start working on this in the following month. So think about training through research, which is generally present. People will say, well, I'm going to learn this skill by working on this project. But also think about more formal training courses as well. So it may be that you have to access that training outside of your university as well. You have a fund available for that. So that's not a problem if you can justify it in terms of the research project in order for you to be able to reach those research goals. Leave out transferable and complementary skills at your peril. It is absolutely important that you show how the training that you receive will make you more employable for a broad range of jobs as well, not just exclusively research. Bearing in mind that of the number of PhDs produced, only a small percentage of them are going to manage to secure permanent employment in academia. It is very important that you show that the skills that you will develop through this will also make you eligible for other careers outside of academia. Explain also how the training will be monitored. This is just a management issue, but it's got to be mentioned along the way as well. I want to come to transfer of knowledge, which, as Grace mentioned, is something that people don't take into account enough. It is very important that you think about, for example, what expertise the fellow is bringing to the host group or institution, and that you talk about how transfer of knowledge will take place. It's got to be two-way transfer of knowledge. So it's not just about what the fellow will learn from the institution, it's also what the institution will learn from the fellow, what they will gain from having them there. So it is important to say what is the expert knowledge, and it's important to say how that knowledge will be transferred, both ways. So think about things like transfer of knowledge through the project itself, through the dissemination activities that are going on with the project, for example. Also through things like workshops, courses, taught modules. Fellows can be involved in teaching if it makes sense in terms of their project, if it makes sense in terms of their CV. If they need teaching experience to be able to get a job at the end of the fellowship, then obviously that's something that's got to be built into the fellowship program as well. Research supervision and so on. So they are good ways to ensure transfer of knowledge. And think also about opportunities for long-term collaboration. The EU wants to know that the investment in you is going to actually have gains beyond the lifetime of the fellowship, and not that you're going to kind of pack up shop at the end of 2 years and everyone goes their separate ways and that's the end of it. So thinking about transfer of knowledge, that you are, for example, training new trainers, that they will carry on that knowledge in the institution and so on. In terms of presenting the supervision, you need to demonstrate the expertise of the host institution and supervisors in this particular field. Don't write a generic description of how great this institution is. If you want to go to Harvard, everyone knows Harvard is great, but what is the expertise in your field? Why is your supervisor the very best supervisor in the world to supervise this project? The infrastructure and collaborations, be very, avoid generic, be very specific to the project. What are the international links available that would help your project? What is the infrastructure available that is appropriate for your research area? And be clear about the practicalities and arrangements for supervision. How will supervision take place? How often will it take place? How will it take place during the secondments? How will supervision be ensured if you are working in a different country or accessing an archive? What are the arrangements that will take place throughout the throughout the fellowship to ensure that your project is appropriately supervised? Researcher, bear in mind that this this fellowship is aimed at the best and brightest scholars in Europe. You need to present yourself in that way, or the incoming fellow needs to present themselves in this way in the proposal. So use all the pages available, use the suggested categories, follow the template, give the evaluators what they're expecting to see. Identify clearly peer-reviewed articles. This is seems like a minor point and something that you it shouldn't need to be said, but you'd be surprised how often it needs to be said. Be very, very clear that you label, that you have a section, peer-reviewed articles, and then list them underneath. Clarify both why you are the best possible candidate to carry out this particular research project and how this project would broaden or deepen your research expertise. So those two aspects need to be there. Impact, just some general ideas to think about in terms of impact. There needs to be a measurable and a clear impact on the fellow in terms of their profile, through impact through training, through career development. Does this provide value for money? Is there a clear result at the end of it? And increasingly, KPIs are becoming more and more important for the impact section. So make it clear that you have in mind how you will measure your progress, how you will ensure the impact, how you will be able to ensure that at all points that you're hitting your impact goals during the project. Is it going to have an impact on research in the field, impact through publications, impact through the production of new knowledge and so on? Impact on the universities involved, through the creation of new networks, through the reinforcement of existing networks, through long-term collaboration. Is the benefit mutual? Will everyone involved benefit from this? Thinking about also the benefit for Europe on the development of excellence in the European research area, making Europe more competitive in certain areas. Again, excellence and competitiveness are concepts that were used in earlier iterations of the Marie-Curie Fellowship, and they're implied still in some of the categories that are mentioned in terms of impact. I think what Grace mentioned about mentioning impact in terms of the Sustainable Development Goals is excellent. That's really appropriate because it is going to play a very central role in the next iteration of the framework, the next framework programme. So it is really good to be thinking about this already. And impact on the general public. How are you going to interest the public and engage the public in your research project? So it's not enough, for example, to say we're going to host an academic conference and it's going to be open to the public. Who's going to ensure that the public are there, that they actually learn something from this conference? So I would say specific events aimed at the general public, or specific measures aimed at in interesting and engaging the general public, you need to have a think about. And also social networks are increasingly being brought up as ways of engaging the general public. And so in general, in terms of impact, thinking about the benefit of your project. So think about what is your project, what kind of benefits is it going to have and for whom, and how are you going to ensure that you maximise those benefits. Implementation. Really what the evaluators will be looking for is they want to know what you will be working on at every stage in the project. So they'll want to see a very clear work plan with a Gantt chart that displays that very clearly. Clear measurable milestones. So what are you going to use to measure your progress? By month 6 I expect to have achieved this. If you actually discover that you've only achieved that by month 9, then you know you're behind time. You need to pick milestones that are going to allow you to measure your progress and allow external measurement through monitoring through your supervision and so on. Deliverables. Think about plans for publications, dates, not necessarily the 27th of October 2020, but in month 9 of the project, I will have drafted my first article, which will be submitted to a journal for review at that point, or in month 16, or this kind of thing. So plans for publications with details and dates, plans for courses to be taught with dates and details, how many students will take part, what level of the students, and so on. Plans for dissemination events with rough dates and with details. What will the concept be? What will the topic of the dissemination event be? What audiences will it be aimed at? How many people do you expect to take part? And what month of the project will it take place? Thinking about how this fits in with the overall project. And there needs to be a clear sense of the arrangements for monitoring and for revision. If you find you are behind schedule, who's going to be ensuring that you get back on schedule? Who can you turn to for help? So who's going to be the person who's going to be your contact point to ensure that you are monitored and that you can revise your schedule if necessary as you're going along. So it's not just about an aspiration or a goal, it's also about showing that you have a clear plan for how you're going to achieve this goal. So some final pointers, some final things to think about as you prepare your proposal. Register soon and download the templates. Do that today. Have a look and see what is expected of you. Adhere to the suggested font and margin sizes. This is important because if your font is smaller than the suggested font size, there is a risk of it being considered ineligible. So just ensure that you take this into account. Do not exceed the page limits. Any information that's presented beyond page limits will be watermarked, so the evaluators are indicated not to take it into account. Pitch your application at an educated reader who may not be an expert in your particular, let's say, subfield. So you expect to talk to someone who has read widely in your field but might not necessarily know the specifics of the subsection of your field, the specific project that you're working on. It is important to address all of the sub-criteria in your proposal and make life easy for the evaluators. Label everything clearly. 3 things to bear in mind is not all of the expert evaluators will be subject experts. I've said that already. Not all of the expert evaluators will be native speakers of English. So this is not a forum to show your amazing use of the English language and vary your language. Be clear. Clarity is the most important thing. You want to get your message across here. And I would suggest get feedback on your application before you submit it. Feedback from colleagues, but also feedback through the support services, through the Research Development Office, through the IUA. get as much feedback as you can to ensure that your application is really at in the best state that it can be before you actually submit it. And as a final pointer, don't be put off if you don't get the grant first time. Reapply. You will get an evaluation summary report which gives you a very, very clear overview of the strengths and weaknesses of your proposal. And that can help you, it can serve as a roadmap for how to improve your proposal for the second time you apply. I would say absolutely don't, given the competitiveness of the programme, don't take it to heart if you don't get the grant first time. 4 out of 5 people are not going to get the grant first time. It's a question of what they do with that knowledge the following year. And the success rates on reapplication are much higher. Okay, that's it from me. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
David? Are there any markers on the reapplication?
No, there aren't. And at least up until last year there weren't anyway. So no, you've nothing to lose by putting in an application before you actually consider it entirely ready. It's not like with the ERC where you have to sit out a couple of years before you can reapply. So if you think, not quite ready this year, put in an application anyway. Do your very, very best with it. Let it fail. Use the feedback to see what the evaluators consider to be the strengths of the proposal and the weaknesses of the proposal, and improve it for the following year.
And what are the timelines for the evaluation and when can we start?
They say 8 months from start to finish, so you should get the 5 months, you get your result, and 3 months negotiation phase. But you can push out the start date, I think, by up to a year, if I'm not mistaken.
It's 18 months.
18 months,
yeah,
excellent.
yeah.
Right, okay.
18 months.
Yeah.
You will sign the grant agreement first.
So basically 26 months maximum.
Yeah, well it's September 2020, so it's not 18 months from the earliest start date of March. So
Right.
then, yeah, so
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
it. But you have to select that date then.
Yeah.